Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, November 17th, 2022, and in just about 3 weeks, the Georgia Senate race will be heading full force into its runoff election between Senator Reverend Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker, the Republican nominee for Senate in the state of Georgia. Now, President Donald Trump made an announcement just 2 days ago saying that he will be running for re-election in 2024. Coming to a surprise to practically no one, Donald Trump has really changed the narrative about what we talk about in terms of our political discourse. And with Donald Trump re-entering into the presidential race, any and all news articles have been centered around the former president of the United States. The focus on the runoff has now turned to a focus on the presidential election, with many media companies neglecting what the runoff election would mean for America and the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Right now, the runoff election stands between two top candidates, two of which did solidly, well back in the 2022 midterms just 2 weeks, or just a week ago. I don't know why I said 2 weeks. It feels like it was 2 weeks ago. It feels like an eternity ago, if you ask me. We found the final result, giving Herschel Walker and Raphael Warnock a margin of about 1 point between the two, with Warnock being ahead by just 0.9% across the state. This margin was not enough to give Raphael Warnock the victory. The way it works in Georgia is that you must get an outright majority in order to proceed past this first round of voting. It's not necessarily a jungle primary. There are still primaries that occur months before the general election. But what happens is that on election day, if neither candidate receives 50% plus one of the vote, you head to a runoff election, what used to be 2 months after the election, which is now, due to a new amended law, 1 month after the election. Warnock leading by 0.9% is a good indicator for Democrats, but Donald Trump is an even better one. Allow me to explain what I mean. So with Donald Trump re-entering back into the presidential race, like I said, there has been a huge focus on President Trump when it comes down to the 2024 race. That is all anybody can talk about when it comes down to the expectations of Trump and his future within the Republican Party. But before Donald Trump announced, when there was all this consideration and rumors going around circulating that Donald Trump was going to announce, Republicans were very quick to say that they wanted him to stay out of the Georgia runoff race, and if they had it their way, would want him not to run for re-election. You can find this, and I've highlighted some interesting parts because it shows really exemplifies my point here, but you can find it from the outgoing lieutenant governor of the state of Georgia, Jeff Duncan, who ran with Brian Kemp back in 2018. He won his election, and what you found was that his comments about Donald Trump was saying that by announcing his next presidential campaign before the dust has settled on 2022, referring to the Georgia governor race or Senate race, Donald Trump has the ability to cost Georgia a third Senate race in less than 2 years. His conspiracy theories and the candidates who carried them were rejected soundly at the ballot box last week. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results, end quote. So what we are hearing from the outgoing lieutenant governor of the state of Georgia is that Donald Trump not only will lose them this race, but has lost them 2 races prior to. What was he referencing? He's referencing the 2021 runoff elections back in the state of Georgia. He's referencing Raphael Warnock's victory back in 2021. He's referencing the John Ossoff victory back in 2021. 2 Senate races in less than 2 years that Donald Trump is costing the Republican Party. What we also find, too, is that an Atlanta-based GOP strategist, Brian Robinson, told the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, they do a lot of polls within the state, the same polls that said that Raphael Warnock was going to lose the race. And the most recent one we found from them, let's see if we can find it here. It should be somewhere around here. Maybe I'm missing it. Maybe it was done prior to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Maybe I'm not able to find it super easily, but you can look back at the data and see that right here, it showed about an even margin. So I guess we'll roll with an even margin for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. But the point is that, they are the same ones that were pretty accurate when it came down to this race. So they're talking with GOP strategists here, and we're hearing from them that they are pushing back against President Trump. It says the Republicans' best chance to keep this as a referendum on Joe Biden, their best chance is to keep it as a referendum on Joe Biden. A message that Herschel has stuck with discipline, right? We find from the former Cobb County GOP chair that there's no reason he had to get out this early, especially with the focus being on Georgia. I mean, the pushback on President Trump is absolutely there, and it's coming from some of the top leaders within the Republican Party in the state of Georgia. You can see here that some suggest that everything over this next month is about Herschel Walker and making sure we get the win there. That's what Jason Miller, a former Trump aide, told Newsmax, adding that the priorities A, B, and C need to be about Herschel Walker. Need to be about Herschel Walker, not about Donald Trump. And yet that's exactly what this has shaped up to be. And when you go through the remainder of the article, you see a lot more discussion about President Trump and his impact on this race, but all of it is very negative. And honestly, it makes a lot of sense. We remember how contentious the Georgia runoff elections were back in 2021, and they determined the balance of power for the control of the U.S. Senate in favor of the Democratic Party. That only happened because Donald Trump was disliked. Georgia ultimately is a swing state. Democrats should have lost the race knowing the down-ballot performance of Republicans in the past 2020 election. Georgia, quite frankly, should have gone red. And in the initial count of votes, it did. Warnock defeated Loeffler 33-26, but the combined Democratic vote versus the combined Republican vote showed the Democrats losing. In the first round of voting between Ossoff and Perdue, David Perdue received 49.7% of the vote to Jon Ossoff's 47.9%. But when voters were given the opportunity to vote again, to vote further, and in a one-on-one race, they decided to opt for the Democrat. What does that tell us? It tells us that when voters were prompted with this opportunity to push back further on Donald Trump, they took the opportunity and ran with it. For the first time in decades, Georgia was represented by 2 Democratic senators, one of which won't be up until 2026, and following the runoff election that is occurring, potentially will not be up until 2028. The numbers back in 2021 indicated that Warnock was going to win, and quite frankly, the problem lies more, deeper and beyond Donald Trump within this state. It doesn't help that the victory for Brian Kemp will not be on the same ballot that there may be a victory for Herschel Walker. Brian Kemp could have dragged Herschel Walker across the finish line with him, but he didn't. Brian Kemp received 53% of the vote. Herschel Walker received 48%. That's a huge drop-off in terms of people that support Brian Kemp but refused to support Herschel Walker. Stacey Abrams only received 45.9% of the vote. Raphael Warnock received 49.4%, nearly a 4-point increase relative to the governor margin or the governor vote share for Stacey Abrams. A very big difference. And what does that tell us? That number one, Republicans absolutely can win in Georgia. They have the means to, and they did so in every single race beyond the Senate race. But that voters here very much have considered and voted for Republicans, yet are unwilling to back Herschel Walker. Willing to back Kemp, willing to back Raffensperger, willing to back all of the other Republicans, unwilling to back Herschel Walker. Donald Trump entering into this race has made this a lot less focused, or made us and the media a lot less focused on this runoff. One thing that I really think would have benefited the GOP is if the Senate control came down to the Georgia runoff election. Initially, I thought that this would help Democrats, but I honestly think Republicans are in a worse off position now than they were previously. We know the one thing that can inspire Democrats to donate, organize, and turn out to vote in high levels, and it's the former president of the United States. Not necessarily Obama, who will be coming down to Georgia, which is also a good sign for the Democrats there, but it's about President Donald Trump. It's about pushing back against an extremist agenda that voters have already rejected in the state. What I mean by that is, when you look at the Georgia Republican primary for governor, Brian Kemp ran against David Perdue, the same David Perdue that we talked about in the Senate election back in 2021. Elected back in 2014, served through 2021, David Perdue is a statewide elected official, someone they recognize, someone who won larger than Kemp did. In 2014, David Perdue won by about 7 to 8 points. Brian Kemp in 2018 only won by about 1 point. And yet in the runoff election, despite Donald Trump's endorsement very, very early on, despite Donald Trump coming down to the state of Georgia and campaigning for David Perdue over Brian Kemp ended up winning 74% of the vote to David Perdue's 22%. 74% of the vote versus 22%. Republicans already rejected Donald Trump's vision for the governor's race. They rejected David Perdue in an excessive and high margin, and it headed straight into a general election where Brian Kemp soared to being reelected by the people in Georgia. Without that on the ballot, with Donald Trump in heavy contention and heavy consideration amongst the minds of voters, it's a recency bias issue as well. In just 2.5 weeks, voters will cast their ballot for the state of Georgia with the thought in mind that Donald Trump may be the next president of the United States. These things don't help. Voters in Georgia already rejected Trump in 2020. They rejected the Republicans in 2021. And now fast forwarding to 2022, they all but rejected Herschel Walker in the first round of the vote. And heading into the runoff, there isn't much helping him there. When the media is not hyping up this race, when Republicans are diverting resources away from Georgia into the presidential campaign for Donald Trump, what you find is a lot of issues for Herschel Walker. Top Republicans that might have been more focused on the Georgia Senate runoff election. Top and mainstream Republicans, the elites, the establishment Republicans that may have been focused on the Senate race now have bigger fish to fry. They now have more important races to focus on. And that detraction away, in terms of media attention, in terms of allocation of funds, whatever it might be, Donald Trump has reeled in millions of dollars since announcing that he's running for president. Millions of dollars in his campaign account. Think about how much good that could do for Herschel Walker, considering that he only lost the first round by about 0.9%. But the problem is that voters are no longer focused on Georgia. They are focused on the 2024 election, and quite frankly, rightfully so. The expectations have dwindled tremendously for the GOP in the state of Georgia. The betting odds that gave Herschel Walker about 65% in terms of a chance at victory on election night have now dwindled his chances to just 23%. Raphael Warnock went from a whopping low of 39 cents for a yes share up to 77 cents. Voters and those spending their money on these races are a lot more confident about where they stand in these states. A lot more confident that Democrats will pull ahead. And from my own standpoint, my final projection of the cycle was that Georgia would head to a runoff and go to go to Raphael Warnock. And that's exactly what we're starting to see circle up and center around. Even though FiveThirtyEight said that Herschel Walker had a 63% chance of victory on election day, that simply did not come true. And the majority of the circumstances in which the Republicans were to win in the state would have happened before the runoff election. But considering that the runoff election did not happen, the runoff election did happen, and we have to move forward and proceed there, the Democrats should be happy. They should be happy that they are able to do well in this state, largely in part because they survived that first round, and Donald Trump made an even more beneficial environment for them to run in. If I was to put money on this race, I would full send Raphael Warnock. It makes sense. Warnock is in a very, very good position to win his election, and that's exactly what's going to happen. Unless something dramatically changes between now and December 6th, Donald Trump's influence on the race will be entirely negative. Voters on both sides of the aisle have started to consider rejecting Donald Trump as the Republican nominee for president in 2024, including the GOP, with many Republicans choosing to abandon him. It's just a bad combination for Herschel Walker. The numbers don't look good. They outperformed in the polls. Brian Kemp is no longer on the ballot, and now Donald Trump is running, taking away money, resources, funding, whatever it might be. He is taking away a huge chunk of what Herschel Walker is relying on. Herschel Walker is relying on heavy enthusiasm, high turnout, a hyper-fixed focus by the mainstream media on his race, and now all of that is absolutely gone. What I would be less surprised about now, considering Donald Trump is running, is that the Democrats will be coming out in full force and could potentially win by even larger than they did in 2021. Why would that be significant? Well, 2021 was a lot better of a year for President Biden and Democrats than what we expected 2022 to be. And based off of favorability rating, approval rating, and generic ballot, 2021, in fact, was a better year for Democrats on the national average. However, today, Democrats, despite with Biden being down in the negatives by double digits nationwide, the generic ballot ending last week, but still something to point out, showing the Republicans ahead nationwide, Georgia still was close. Georgia was close enough that the Democratic Party came very close to victory and will likely win their election this time around. Herschel Walker and Raphael Warnock are in a very close race, But realistically, with all of these factors impacting Herschel Walker in a negative way, Raphael Warnock is on track to being reelected from the state of Georgia, which would be a very big move, a very, very good move for the Democratic Party, something that they can celebrate because it means that the next time a Republican can win a Senate race in Georgia is in 2026. The next time they could get Warnock's seat would be in 2028. We have seen the 3 consistent failures of elections for the Republican Party when Donald Trump has a huge say in what happens and who wins. 2018, 2020, and now 2022. The question is there a continuous pushback against Republicans because of the impact and involvement in the race from a candidate like Donald Trump? I would bet on a yes. The results will tell us on December 6th. But honestly speaking, based off of what we have seen thus far, I am far from impressed as to how President Trump is doing across these states and how President Trump is going to perform in the 2024 presidential race. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch in a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.